Have you ever noticed that sometimes speaking Spanish can actually feel a little bit easier than understanding it when native speakers are talking?
Yeah.
It's something that a lot of language learners experience, and that's actually what we're diving deep into today.
Okay.
We've got some really cool articles about language learning, like tips and advice, and then we've got some explanations about how our brains actually work, and even some personal stories.
Interesting.
And all of them kind of shed light on this weird phenomenon.
Okay.
So our mission today is going to be to figure out, you know, what is it about understanding native speakers that makes it so tricky?
Right.
What's the science behind it? And
Hmm.
are there any tips or tricks that we can use to get better at it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it is interesting, like you said, this kind of universal feeling that language learners have. Like
Yeah.
you're going along and you're feeling pretty confident. Maybe you can speak fairly well.
hmm
And then all of a sudden you encounter a native speaker and it's like, whoa.
Yeah, it's like a totally different ballgame.
It is. You're right. Yeah, totally different. So is it really easier to speak Spanish or is there something else going on?
Yeah, that's the big question, right?
Right. Well, one of the sources that we have, it's called Eye Openers, and they talk about the brain.
Okay.
And it turns out that different parts of our brains actually handle understanding and speaking.
Okay. So there's a part for understanding, there's a part for speaking.
That's right. So Wernicke's area is the one that handles comprehension, and that's located in the temporal lobe of your brain.
hmm
And then Broca's area, which is in the frontal lobe, that one focuses on producing speech.
Okay. Two different parts of the brain, two totally different things, but they must be connected somehow, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they're definitely linked.
Okay.
But they function in really distinct ways.
hmm
And to really kind of highlight that, um, the article actually shares a really interesting story about somebody who could understand French perfectly,
Wow.
but they couldn't speak it.
That's so wild.
Isn't that interesting? And that actually underscores how important it is to actively practice.
Oh, to practice speaking.
Yes, speaking to develop fluency.
Okay.
If you're not actively practicing speaking, then it's not going to come naturally.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And one more thing about that I thought was interesting, is that damage to either of those areas, so either Broca's or Wernicke's, can actually lead to like a specific language impairment.
Oh, wow.
So it just really highlights how kind of interconnected those language centers are, but also how specialized they are as well.
Yeah, like each one has its own job.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. It's like any skill, I guess. You could watch, baking shows all day long and understand every technique, but until you get in there and start mixing and kneading, you're never going to be a master baker.
You got it exactly. That's a really good way to put it.
Yeah.
But there's more to it than just practice too.
Okay.
Another source pointed out what they call the passive listening trap.
The passive listening trap.
Yeah. So this is where we might think we understand more than we actually do.
Oh, okay.
Because we're kind of picking up those familiar words here and there.
hmm
But we're actually filtering out all of the stuff that we don't know.
Oh, okay. So you're kind of creating this illusion of fluency.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
You're like, oh yeah, I understood that, but really you only understood like 10% of the words.
Yeah. You got the gist.
Yeah.
Maybe.
But not the details.
Right. Right. And
Yeah.
that's actually where it gets particularly tricky with Spanish
Okay.
because a few sources brought up this challenge of word linkage.
Word linkage, what is that?
So that's where the words kind of flow together
Yeah.
in spoken Spanish.
Okay.
And it can be really hard to figure out where one word ends and another one begins.
Oh, like they all just kind of mush together?
They do. It's like a puzzle.
Okay.
You got to figure out, okay, what are the individual words here?
Oh, wow. That sounds really tough.
It can be, yeah. And one source gave a really good example of that.
Great.
So they used the phrase, ¿qué es esto?
Okay.
Which is like, what is this?
Yeah.
And they said that in natural speech, it often sounds like questo.
Oh, wow. So even a simple phrase can sound completely different when it's spoken naturally.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay. So how do we crack the code?
Yeah?
How do we go from that kind of passive listening to actually understanding what native speakers are saying?
Well, the sources had some good advice.
Okay, I'm ready.
One thing they said is that it can be helpful to practice listening to authentic Spanish.
Okay.
Not just the stuff in textbooks, but real people talking.
Okay.
And they said you can even use tools to slow down the audio.
Oh, that's smart.
if you need to,
Yeah.
so that you can catch those little cues, those little word connections. Because it's like training your ears to get used to the rhythm
Yeah.
of the language.
The music of the language.
Exactly, yeah. And then another really important tip that they had was to learn about the rules of word linkage.
Okay.
So if you actually understand how the words connect, then you can anticipate what you're going to hear. And that can make it easier to kind of decipher those rapid fire phrases.
Okay, so it's like learning musical notation.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
So once you understand the rules of like harmony and rhythm, then you can appreciate and you can anticipate what's coming next in a really complex musical piece.
That's a great way to think about it. Yeah, you're totally right. So it's not just about the words themselves, but it's also about how they kind of work together and connect within phrases.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And speaking of phrases, several sources actually talked about the importance of going beyond individual words and really understanding the meanings of complete phrases.
Yeah, you can know all the words in a phrase,
right?
But the phrase itself might mean something totally different.
Exactly. And one of the articles, it was called The Top 5 Reasons. They had a really good example of this.
Okay.
They said, dar cuenta. If you just look at those words, think it means account.
Right.
But darse cuenta actually means to realize.
Oh, okay. So the words are the same.
Yeah.
But just a tiny little change can completely change the meaning.
Exactly. And that's why a lot of the sources said it's important to learn vocabulary in complete sentences.
Okay.
And focus on those common phrases and idiomatic expressions.
Okay.
Because then you can really understand the context and avoid those mistakes.
Yeah, those misunderstandings.
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't know, it's like you're unlocking a secret code.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
Where you have to learn the nuances and the hidden meanings.
That's right.
Behind these phrases.
Yeah. And that actually, that becomes even more important when you consider just how diverse the Spanish language is.
Yeah. You're talking about accents and dialects, right?
I am, yeah.
I remember one time I was in Barcelona and...
Barcelona, yeah.
And, I thought I was doing pretty well with my Spanish. And I was having a conversation with a waiter.
Okay.
And all of a sudden, he just starts speaking so fast with this really thick accent that I just could not understand a word he was saying.
Yeah.
And it turns out that he was speaking Catalan.
Oh, wow.
Which I guess is like...
It's similar, yeah.
Related to Spanish.
Yeah.
But it has its own pronunciation and vocabulary.
Yeah, it does. It has a lot of its own, yeah.
And I was just totally lost.
Oh, man.
So I just kind of smiled and nodded. And I was like, I hope I'm not ordering, like squid ink pasta or something.
Right.
But
that's a great story.
But it really made me realize like how diverse the Spanish-speaking world is.
It is. And that was something that came up in a lot of the sources too.
Okay.
Just this incredible diversity of accents and dialects. And they were saying that even native Spanish speakers can have trouble understanding each other sometimes.
Really?
Yeah. When they're from different regions or different countries even.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's almost like, you think you're learning this one language, but then you realize it's almost like a whole bunch of little languages.
Yeah.
All kind of grouped together.
Like encountering a whole new world.
It is.
Within a language you thought you knew.
Exactly. Yeah. So how do we deal with that?
Yeah. How do we navigate this maze?
Right. Well, the sources had some suggestions.
Okay.
One thing they said is, especially when you're first starting out, try to be intentional about the type of Spanish you're listening to.
Okay.
So, maybe pick one dialect and really focus on that until you feel like you have a good foundation, and then you can start branching out.
Okay, so it's like you're mastering one genre of music before you try to play every instrument in the orchestra.
Exactly. And then as you start to branch out, they said that regional dictionaries can be really helpful.
Okay.
So, you mentioned those earlier.
I did, yeah.
The Diccionario de Real Academia Española and Así Hablamos.
Yeah.
Those are really good for understanding those unique expressions and the slang that's used in different places.
So it's like having a decoder ring for different Spanish-speaking regions.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
But beyond that, we talked about dictionaries, we talked about focused listening. Are there any other tips for improving comprehension?
Yeah, especially when it comes to those really fast conversations.
Yeah. I remember in one of the articles they talked about feeling more fluent after a glass of wine.
Oh, yeah.
And while we don't recommend,
Relying on that.
relying on alcohol
Yeah,
to become fluent,
as a strategy.
it does point to something interesting about the psychology of language learning.
Okay.
Because sometimes it's that pressure of speaking
Oh, yeah.
and that fear of making mistakes that can really hold us back.
It can.
Yeah, it can be really intimidating.
Yeah, like sometimes I'll be in a conversation
Mm-hmm.
and I'll be so worried about making a mistake
Yeah.
that my mind just goes completely blank. And
Yeah.
all those words that I studied so hard
Yeah,
just disappear.
they're gone.
They're gone.
And I think a lot of the sources were really emphasizing that it's okay to make mistakes.
Okay.
That's part of the learning process.
It is.
And that most people are really understanding,
Yeah.
especially when they see that you're genuinely trying.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's like we have to give ourselves permission to be imperfect.
And not be perfect.
Yeah.
To stumble a bit
Mm-hmm.
as we're learning.
Exactly. And if we can kind of embrace those mistakes
Yeah.
as learning opportunities, that can be really freeing. And if we can shift our focus from being perfect
Mm.
to just making progress,
Yeah.
I think that can do wonders for our confidence and our motivation.
Yeah. So instead of getting bogged down by every mistake,
Yeah,
we can celebrate those little victories.
exactly.
Every new word we learn, every conversation we have,
That's right.
even if it's not perfect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think, coming back to our original question,
Mhm.
is speaking Spanish really easier than understanding it?
Yeah.
I think after looking at all these sources,
Yeah.
the answer is it's complicated.
There's no clear winner.
Not really, no.
Okay.
Because, when we're speaking, we have control. We
Mhm.
get to choose the words, we get to choose the pace.
Uh-huh.
But understanding what native speakers are saying,
Yeah.
that requires a whole other set of skills.
Okay.
You need a wider vocabulary. You need to be aware of those cultural nuances in
Mm.
that context.
Yeah.
So it's almost like,
Like the difference between paddling in a calm lake and sailing across the ocean.
I like that. Yeah.
They both take skill. They both take practice.
Mm-hmm.
But the challenges are different.
We are.
And so are the rewards.
That's a really good analogy. And I think all of the sources agreed that both speaking and understanding
Yeah.
are really important for becoming fluent in Spanish.
Yeah.
It's like two sides of the same coin.
Okay.
You need both.
They both have their place.
They do.
So it's not really about which one is easier. It's
Mhm.
just recognizing that they both have their own challenges
That's right.
and their own rewards.
Yeah. And that actually brings us to kind of a key question for our listeners.
Okay.
So we've talked about how important exposure is for understanding.
Right.
So what are some ways that people can immerse themselves in real Spanish?
Yeah, like how do we get more of that authentic content?
Exactly.
That's a great question. It's like, how do we level up?
Yeah. And the sources had some good ideas. They talked about music and movies and podcasts,
Oh, yeah.
even connecting with native speakers online.
Okay.
All of those things can be really helpful.
Yeah.
And we talked about the dictionaries too.
We did. Those regional
Yours
dictionaries.
can be like treasure maps,
Yeah.
leading you to all sorts of new expressions and slang.
Okay. Yeah, I like that.
So the key is to find something that you enjoy,
Yeah.
that you're interested in,
Yeah.
because if you're interested in it, then you're going to want to listen to it.
Right. It becomes fun.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's not a chore anymore.
It's like an adventure.
It is.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Spanish comprehension,
Mm-hmm.
the main takeaway I'm getting is that
Yeah.
understanding native speakers is possible.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It is. It takes practice and a willingness to make those mistakes
Mm.
and a lot of curiosity.
Curiosity is key.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And who knows? Maybe one day we'll all be out there just effortlessly understanding those rapid-fire conversations.
I hope so. That'd be great.
Even with a Catalan accent.
Even with a Catalan accent, that's the goal.
Well, until then,
Yeah.
keep listening, keep learning, and keep exploring this amazing language.
I love it.
Happy learning, everyone.
Happy learning.
And we'll catch you on the next deep dive.